Thank you. I now call to order the Tuesday, July 27th, 2021 public hearing on the budget. I'm going to read some opening remarks and then turn it over to the superintendent. Good evening and welcome to the first of two public hearings for the 2021-22 budget. We are here tonight to review the proposed property tax rate and budget for the 2021-22 school year, consider comments from the public, and approve the tentative millage and the tentative budget. The order of business and action taken tonight must follow very specific directions set forth in state statutes, and we ask for your cooperation as we go through all this legally required format. There will be two opportunities for you to speak this evening. First, you may comment on the proposed millage rates. Second, you may comment on the proposed budget. If you wish to speak, you must register separately for each part of the hearing with our staff members and at the entrance of the boardroom. After tonight's hearing, the school board will continue to review the tentative budget. We may make changes or reduce the millage prior to the next meeting, but during the final hearing, which is scheduled for September 14th, 2021, we cannot raise the millage rate higher than what we tentatively set here tonight. On behalf of the school board and superintendent, I thank each one of you for taking the time to participate in tonight's hearing. And at this time, I would like to entertain a motion that we adopt the agenda.
I motion to adopt.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. And opposed, say no. It passes unanimously. Thank you. Dr. Grego and staff will make some introductory comments prior to the presentation and before we hear any comments from the public. Dr. Grego?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And school board members, I first and foremost want to thank you for your work in establishing and developing this budget, and also your interest in assisting us putting it together. As you know, this budget is tied directly to our strategic plan, which is extremely important that we have the resources and know-how and are all moving in the right direction. Consistent with prior year's practice, the budget was presented to this board in a very detailed fashion. I want to thank Mr. Smith, our CFO, and all of your staff for presenting such a detailed plan. I don't know another board in the state that has that level of detail back in June 22nd, and here we are at the end of July. And at that workshop, the budget was laid out, as I said, in great detail and explained all of the functions and objects, and I know you've met individually with several of the board members. Consistent with past practices, we're going to continue to examine all aspects of the budget. The budget is a moving document to maximize the impact on our students and on our employees. I once again truly want to thank this board for putting together and assisting this budget. I want to call upon Mr. Kevin Smith, the CFO, to introduce the budget and your staff, and so we'll go through the appropriate requirements for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Grego. Madam Chair, board members and staff, our Truth and Millage ad appeared this past Sunday in the Tampa Bay Times, which is legally required. The format for the newspaper ad and the order of tonight's hearing presentations are prescribed by Chapter 200 of Florida statutes. As Mrs. Cook mentioned, it must follow a specific format. Based on your action tonight, the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's Office will send out proposed tax notices. These notices will legally indicate the time and place of our second and final public hearing, which will take place on Tuesday evening, September 14th. The proposed and tentative budget that's presented to you tonight is based upon estimates right now, as our books for the fiscal year 2020-2021 have not yet been closed. At the second public hearing, though, the hearing book will reflect actual ending balances for year-end 2020-21. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Luann Jordan, who is our manager of FTE budget and cost reporting, to first present the proposed millage rates, and she will subsequently, after your actions, present the budget. Ms. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Good evening, Dr. Grego, Madam Chair, board members, staff, and community. Truth and Millage, also referred to as TRIM, requires school districts to advertise their proposed budget and millage rates annually. The district's 2021-22 millage is comprised of the general operating millage, which includes the required local effort, discretionary, and local referendum. The Florida Department of Education determines the maximum state-required local effort millage rate that must be levied by the school board to generate its local share of funding for the district. The local referendum of 0.5 mils was initially approved by the voters in 2005, 2006, and was approved for the 5th time in 2020-21 for a 4-year period. The proposed millage also includes the 1.5 mils for capital outlay. A mill refers to the rate of property tax commonly paid on the assessed value of homes and business properties. A mill equates to $1 of taxes for every $1,000 of taxable property value. The rolled back millage rate is the millage rate that would generate the same amount of revenue as last year if applied to the current tax roll after adjusting for new construction. The 2021-22 proposed millage of 6.325 is higher than the rolled back rate by 4.08%. Pinellas County's gross property tax value of approximately $106 billion is an increase from last year's value by $6.6 billion or 6.7%. The proposed millage rate for the 2021-22 year of 6.325 represents an overall decrease of 1.59% when compared to the 2021 total millage rate of 6.427. The required local effort millage has decreased by 2.77%. The property tax revenue comparison reflects an increase in revenue of $30.6 million over last year's proceeds. This is the result of the increase in our property tax value. The required local effort proceeds are increasing by about $13.1 million. The proposed discretionary millage will generate about $4.8 million more, and the referendum will yield an additional $3.2 million. Capital outlay millage will generate $9.6 million more than last year. Under the proposed rate, the owner of a $200,000 home after the deduction of the $25,000 homestead exemption would pay $1,106.88. This averages out to $3.03 per day. The taxable value of property in Pinellas County reflects an increase on average of 6.7% for the year. The Florida legislature has set our required local effort, also referred to as RLE, to 3.577, which is a decrease from the prior year's RLE of 3.679. As a result, some homeowners may experience an increase in their school taxes as demonstrated here, as a result of an increase in property value and not an increase to our levied millage rate. The RLE is an appropriated amount set by the Florida Department of Education. The school board must levy this amount in order to receive state funding. It's used for the day-to-day operations, such as school staff and utilities. The discretionary millage is used for general operations of the district and to meet additional costs due to inflation. Local referendum funds are used to recruit and retain quality teachers, preserve reading, art, music programs, and provide up-to-date textbooks and technology. The capital outlay millage is the district's primary funding source for maintenance, renovations, new construction, and equipment as advertised on July 25th. At this time, I'll turn the meeting back to the board chair to allow for public comment and for the motions necessary to adopt the millage rates.
Thank you. Mrs. Christie, do we have any speakers to address the millage in support of the budget?
Board members and Dr. Grego, we have no speakers for item 5.
All righty, thank you. Then I will entertain a motion to approve the tentative discretionary local effort millage. Do we have a motion? All right, Mrs. Long? No, Mrs. Long indicated first. Would you be comfortable seconding? Okay, good. So Mrs. Long made the motion with a second from Mrs. Kane. Go for it, please. What's your motion?
Approval of tentative discretionary local effort millage. I move that the board approve the levying of a tentative discretionary local effort millage of 0.748 mils as part of the total millage to be certified to the public appraiser and Florida Department of Revenue.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the tentative discretionary local millage at 0.748 mils. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no, and it passes unanimously. Thank you. I'll now entertain a motion to adopt the total millage rates. Dr. Carr? Do we have a second? And Mrs. Kane, second. Thank you.
Adoption of total millage rates. I move that the board adopt a tentative millage rate of 6.325 mils to be set and certified to the property appraiser and to the Florida Department of Revenue. The millage rates are as follows. For required local effort, 3.577 mils. For discretionary local effort, 0.748 mils. For local referendum, 0.500 mils. For capital outlay, 1.500 mils. Total tentative millage, 6.325 mils. This rate is 4.08% greater than the rolled back rate.
All righty, thank you. We do have a motion and a second, and I'm not going to read it again for fear I might read a number differently than you stated. So if there's any discussion from the board? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no, and it passes unanimously. I will now send it back to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook.
Mhm.
This portion of the presentation covers the district's tentative budget for 2021-22. The budget calendar is ongoing throughout the year. During the course of the year, budget updates are provided at board workshops, and monitoring is performed through budget analyses and forecasts. In the spring, we typically have a better idea of what the legislative budget is providing for us, whether we can expect an increase or a decrease in state funds. Budget steering committee meetings are held during this time frame, primarily for capital outlay requests. In July and September, we hold 2 public hearings regarding the budget and millage. Tonight is the first of those hearings. As mentioned earlier, the second hearing will be held on September 14th. Certain parameters guide the building of the budget. We strive to and have been able to maintain a 63-37 ratio. This means at least 63% of all expenses are for direct instruction or in the classroom, and 37% are related to other areas such as instructional support, plan operations, and administration. In short, at least 2/3 of all funding goes toward expenditures in the classroom. We're required by statute to maintain a minimum 3% contingency, while district policy states we are to maintain a minimum 5% contingency. This budget projects our contingency to be approximately 7% at the end of the 2021-22 fiscal year. We also budget so as to support our core curriculum and strategic directions. The majority of our budget is in our general fund. This year it's proposed to be approximately $964 million. The second largest funding source is capital outlay at $397 million. The district's self-insured health fund is anticipated to be approximately $169 million and represents the district's third largest fund. The total proposed budget for all funds this year is approximately $1.6 billion. Looking at the budget summary for all revenue sources, you see that about 60% of the total budget comes from the general fund. Capital outlay accounts for almost 25%. The combined total of these two funds comprises approximately 85% of our entire budget. The new year brings several legislative changes. The base student allocation, or BSA, increased to $4,372.91. This is an increase of $53.42, or 1.24% over last year's BSA. Statewide, funding decreased by $103 million, or by $16.7 million to Pinellas due to decreased student enrollments during the pandemic. A reserve of $464 million for returning students has been put in place at the state level. Changes in the Florida retirement system contribution rate are projected to increase district expenditures by about $4 million. Total operating fund resources are anticipated to be approximately $964 million. Of that, about $510 million comes from local sources, which include the half-mil referendum. $333 million come from state resources. The Florida Education Finance Program, or FEFP, is the general fund's primary funding source. The FEFP funding formula utilizes a combination of state and local resources to fund education. Looking at the operating revenue budget graphically, you'll note that local sources represent about 53% of the total operating budget, and state sources account for nearly 35%. The remaining 12% comes from transfers and fund balance. The operating budget is used to fund the day-to-day operating expenditures of the district. It pays for salaries and benefits, supplies and materials, textbooks, student transportation, utilities, maintenance, and repairs. Viewing the distribution of our operating budget by object, there's little change from previous years. About 62% of our budget is spent on salaries and 21% on benefits. In total, 83% of our operating budget goes towards staffing. Capital outlay funds include revenue from both state and local sources. This fund reflects the revenue and expenditures for construction and renovation of school buildings and grounds. The majority of these funds are generated by the local capital improvement millage, which is set by law and limited to 1.5 mils. No PICO funds are expected this year for traditional district schools. Additional funds have been provided through Certificate of Participation, or COPS bonds. The lease purchase financing of capital improvements through the issuance of COPS bonds is a technique frequently utilized by Florida school districts to finance school facilities. An updated 5-year capital outlay plan and facilities work program will be brought to the board at the September 14th board meeting. Changes will include the addition of the 2025-26 year. Our proposed capital outlay budget is approximately $397 million. This budget reflects $163 million in new revenue and $299 million in proposed appropriations. The special revenue budget is comprised of two major categories of federal funds: contracted programs and food service. The total contracted programs budget is approximately $14 million. This budget starts the year off low and builds as the year goes on, as we don't recognize the revenue until it is available to us. Included in this category are the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Act and the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act grants. These grants are also referred to as ESSER and CARES. Food service is a self-sustaining fund as it receives no financial support from the operating fund. Federal reimbursements and local collections are the primary revenue sources. The proposed food service budget is approximately $51 million. The debt service fund is used to account for the payment of general long-term debt principal and interest. This $7 million budget represents the debt service for COPS bonds issued by the district. Previous debt associated with the State Board of Education bonds issued by the state of Florida on the district's behalf in February of 2000 were fully satisfied in 2020-21. The proposed self-insured workers' compensation and liability budget of $5 million accounts for the premium revenue and expenditures associated with the district's self-insured workers' compensation and liability insurance programs. The Self-Insured Health Fund accounts for the district's premium revenue and claim expenditures with a budget of approximately $169 million. The proposed budget and all supporting documents are on file in the Office of Budget and Resource Allocation. This information can also be found online. At this point, I'll turn the meeting back to the board chair to allow for public comment and the motions necessary to adopt the tentative budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mrs. Christie, are there any speakers for this portion of the budget hearing?
Madam Chair, there are no speakers for item 6.
All right, good, thank you very much. So we will look at the motions now that are necessary to adopt the tentative budget. Do we have a motion to approve the tentative budget?
I move that the board approve the tentative 2021-22 budget as presented.
As presented, all right. Do we have a second? All right, we have a second as well. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, so we have a motion and a second for the board to approve the tentative 2021-22 budget as presented. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. It passes unanimously. The next item that we have to address is the motion to establish the time, date, and place for the second public hearing. Ms. Hine, do you have a motion?
I do. I move that the second public hearing on the 2021-22 district budget be held on September 14th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. in the conference hall of the School Administration Building, 301 4th Street Southwest, Largo, Florida.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mrs. Long, second. So we have a motion and a second to hold the second public hearing on the 21-22 district budget to be held September 14th, 2021 at 6:30. That'll be time certain again, in the conference hall of the School Administration Building at 301 4th Street Southwest in Largo, Florida. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. It passes unanimously. And we have one more motion that we have to address to authorize the submittal of the certification of the tax value. Mrs. Emden?
I move that the board authorize the superintendent to advise the property appraiser of the millage rates, including the required rollback rates approved at the first public hearing held on July 27th, 2021.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Dudley made second the motion. All right, so we have a motion and a second to authorize the superintendent to advise the property appraiser of the millage rates, including the required rollback rates approved at the first public hearing held on July 27th, 2021. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. And it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And before I adjourn this portion of the meeting, I would like to thank you, Mr. Smith, and your staff for everything that you put forward. We spent quite a bit of time going through the budget, literally page by page, and explaining it to us. So I appreciate the fact that the board was willing to roll up their sleeves and stick with it, and Mr. Smith, for everything you did to help us understand it prior to this vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the attention and the participation of the board. in this
Thank
process.
you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.